Okay, buenos dias, good morning. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. In case you're wondering, I am not Kenneth Medlock, as it says in your programs. I'm Erika de la Garza. I direct the Latin America Initiative for the Baker Institute. Before we begin, I want to thank Ali Nadir for his valuable help organizing the minister's visit to the Baker Institute, and our wonderful Baker Institute staff for their help putting together this event this morning. So on behalf of the Baker Institute Center for Energy Studies and the Latin America Initiative, we welcome you to this morning's discussion on Ecuador's oil sector. Ecuador is one of the major producers of oil in Latin America, and it has been investing and reforming its energy sector for several years. In the past few months, with the election of President Lenin Moreno, it has also been experiencing some important political changes. Today, we are honored to have with us Carlos Pérez, Ecuador's Minister of Hydrocarbons, who will give us an overview of the country's energy sector and what's going on there. After his presentation, Michael Meyer, the Center for Energy Studies Senior Program Advisor, will moderate your questions and his answers. I'd like to briefly mention a few of Minister Perez's many accomplishments. Before joining the Moreno administration this past May, the minister had an illustrious career in the private sector. He owned and managed an energy consulting firm in Quito, held many important positions at Halliburton, where he worked for over 15 years. And before that, he also worked for Schlumberger and NASA. Minister Perez is no stranger to Texas. He studied electrical engineering at UT Austin, and he also worked in Houston while he was part of Halliburton. So, Minister, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome him.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here at this great place. I'm really honored to be in a setup and an institute that just is great for the industry and for the country. So thank you very much, and thank you for all the people involved in arranging this event. I'm going to talk a little bit about the outlook of Ecuador, and I'm going to try and move a little bit fast to try and finish my presentation in 45 minutes, so we'll have another time to answer some questions that you might have towards the end. But if there are things, you're sure, stop me if you have questions while I'm moving ahead in this presentation, no problem at all. Today I'm going to speak a little bit what the leadership vision is, and for us that's important because there's changes from prior administrations to what we're trying to do today. One part of the visit here is to entice companies to invest in Ecuador in the industry. So I'll speak a little bit about why to invest in Ecuador. I'll go through some numbers on the oil sector, and so you can see where we are today and what our current conditions for the sector are and how attractive it is. And I'll speak later about 4 projects that are being developed and where we're looking for companies and people to look at and hopefully invest in Ecuador. The leadership vision, this is Mr. Lenin Moreno's vision. Basically, he wants to change the perception companies, people, other countries have with regards to Ecuador. He has brought to the table a more open-minded type of personality. He's able to discuss and talk to people and accept comments, accept other points of view, different from what the prior government was, where they had the final saying in every single thing, even for the local people and local enterprises. That was something that basically you either do it my way or things are not done. That's different today. The other thing we're bringing to the table is a very large and important commitment against corruption. That is something that really in the past, not just in Ecuador, but you're aware that the problems are all over the world with regards to corruption, and that is something we're working very hard to change. We want things to be transparent, discussions over the table, not under the table, and we expect to reach a point where everybody feels comfortable discussing with their counterparts in the right way, and things are as we agree on, and not what something's going to happen later on with whatever arrangements are made. We want to continue to develop the industry. Ecuador, and you'll see in a minute, still has important reserves in the country, mainly for crude oil. And we want to continue to develop this because it's a very important part of the Ecuadorian government's budget, and that's how we feed the budget through these investments and through oil production. Ecuador has great potentials in several areas, not just hydrocarbon, but mining reserves are very important in gold and copper, plus other things such as agriculture. We're very, very strong, and we've been blessed to have a country with very good weather and with very good resources that, you know, we need to take advantage of that and use them. So that in line with my personal vision, and as it was mentioned, I worked all my life basically in the private sector. My last job was 35 years with Halliburton, so it's been quite a while in the private sector, and this is actually my first job in the public sector. So I'm trying to adjust to a different type of challenge where things are not done the way it's done in the private industry. In accordance to our law, you can only do as a public servant what's written in the law, no more nor less. In the private sector, you can do whatever is not against the law. So it's, you know, they're totally different concepts. So for me, it's been an adjustment trying to understand how the public sector works. And of course, the speed things, the sense of urgency that we have in the private industry is totally different from the sense of urgency that public sector has. So those are the adjustments that I have to make in my brain, and it's tough when you want things done right away and it just don't happen. So many times the private sector has to have a little bit more patience and work with us on resolving all these issues that might come up. We are looking for synergies between the private and the public sector. That is very important. You know, in the past government, a lot was done by the public sector. And we now understand that we need each other. We need the private sector as we need the public sector to be successful as a government, as a country. So that is why I'm going on the road trying to promote and make people understand that those are the new rules. We are changing the contractual terms in the sense that we are making switching from services contracts or specific services contracts onto what's called in the industry a production sharing contract, which is much more suited for private companies to invest. This being a campus, a university, you should be interested in knowing that the human resources, the technical people, the professionals in the country and the schools are very good. We have very good professionals available in the country, and we normally feed all the different industries through local content, which, by the way, including by law, a minimum of 75% of people that go into a company need to be local professionals. We do allow for foreign professionals, but there's a 25-75 relationship between those two people, groups of people. A little bit of general information. Ecuador has, it's a small country, 283,000 square kilometers in size, 16.5 million people live in the country. The currency is the US dollar, so you don't need to buy new currency when you go there. You can take your own dollars and they will work just fine. The GDP is $185 billion, and GDP per capita is 10,462. Inflation rate is low. Since we are a dollarized economy, it's 1.12%. So that gives the companies some economical stability, that they don't have to start working through inflation rates and devaluation and things that affect businesses when they're working over there. Exports and imports are more or less balanced. We are trying as a government to increase exports. Being a dollarized economy, a way to defend the economy is through exports. Since you cannot devaluate the currency because it's a dollar, you need to work on exports so you can bring dollars into the economy and avoid dollars going out of the economy. And some of the things we're going to see later on in the projects are direct towards reaching that objective, which is avoiding dollars coming out of the economy. Oil production, then these are 2016 numbers. We produced in 2016 an average of 548,000 barrels a day, which are 200 million barrels a year. That has gone down in 2017. Most of you should be familiar with the OPEC's request to cut on production. Ecuador was given a quota of 26,000 barrels a day, actually 25 and a bit, and we had to reduce our production because of being members of the OPEC. We had to comply with that. To this date, we're not fully complying 100% with that cut. We're about halfway through, and we'll see in November, where we have the new OPEC meeting in Vienna, what the new decisions are by that group in order to keep or improve the oil price levels, trying to balance out consumption and production somehow, and hopefully the intent of the OPEC is for the price of oil to be anywhere between $55 and $60 a barrel, which so far we have not reached that target. It's around $50 today. But the companies, I think, have learned to work under those conditions. You know, certain projects that might stay away from a development portfolio because of the costs involved, such as deep water. But the other projects, including shale oil and shale gas, are now within limits of cost that make those projects successful. And a specific case here is the Permian Basin, for example, where the shale oil is and shale gas are being developed, and they're economically feasible under current market conditions. Why invest in Ecuador? As I stated before, and I'm going to go quickly through this, dollarized economy, so that makes things economically stable, low inflation. Politically, this might seem a little bit of a contradiction, but Ecuador used to change presidents once a year. For the last 10 years, we've had one government, one president, and just in May 24th, we switched presidents through an election process. By the way, in Ecuador, it's mandatory for all citizens to vote. You don't have the option to vote or not. You really have to have an excuse not to vote. And so we've elected a new president who will be in office for 4 years. And that makes us, that we're back to a political stability in the country. That is also something that the companies like to see. We have very good infrastructure, roads, ports, airports, information technology, communications, all those things are up to U.S. standards in all the cases, so you won't see much difference, and companies have all the infrastructure they need to operate in country without a problem. And distances are short. It's a small country, so in half an hour flight you go from the capital to the oil fields, or from the capital to the main city such as Guayaquil, or to the refinery, so it's just easy to move around. Human talent, I already mentioned that. We have very good people, very good schools, and companies normally don't have problems to find the right resources to have a staff or staff up for any type of operation. All the universities cover most of the different careers that are required for that. You might be short in nanotechnology or things like that, that it's just very specific to other countries, but for the most, we are covered with good resources. Natural resources, I explained before, you know, we're very strong in mining, and that is something we're trying to tap into. It's not I mean, mining has been there for quite a while, but regulations were not there, and that is something that the last government did, set up regulations so companies are going into the country. There's quite a bit of Canadian effort going in there for both gold and copper mining, which we have very large reserves. And then, of course, we talked about hydrocarbons, water, agriculture, and so on. There's a wide variety of things you can do there, and the country is good for all those things. High standards of living, we already spoke, and tax incentives. If you're a new company going into the country, there's certain tax incentives to attract investment, and you're welcome to look at those things. Oil sector, I said a little bit about the production, but in this slide, what's important is that Petroamazonas, the state oil company, produces about 79% of the total production, and then the international or private sector produces 25% of the total production. So there is quite a bit of room for the private sector to grow, and that is what we're trying to promote. Several of the international companies have been there for quite a while. Schlumberger has been in Ecuador since 1925, so they have a long-standing history of working in the country for many years, and it is difficult. Sometimes it depends on how the governments react, but they've been in the good and the bad times, and companies do make money when they are committed to the country. So you have all these companies who have been there over 50 years in country, and you know, they're still there, they like it, and they continue to do business. A little bit about the oil industry. Let's see, this is here's the point. Ecuador started its oil business here in Ancon, where I was brought up. I got into a Schlumberger truck when I was 2 years old. So there's where it all started. This is very light crude oil. This is basically the Amistad field, which are gas fields in the Gulf of Guayaquil. And then most of the oil activities in the Amazon jungle, the mountains come down here all the way. Quito, the capital, is here. So most of the activity, and I see some people who have been there since Raul has been there from start when Texaco started the operations in Ecuador in the early 1970s, and we discovered large oil reserves in that area. Those fields are still producing, and we'll talk a little bit about the technology needs, but what we continue to develop, one thing that when I talk about the ITT, please refer to this map. This is the ITT, which is an important field that I'll discuss a little bit later on with Tiputini, Tambococha, and Ispingo are the three fields here. And the importance about this, which I'll touch later on, is related to the sustainable development in a very critical area. When I say critical, it's because of the environment, being a park with a lot of biodiversity, with non-contacted tribes that have never been in touch with a white man or woman. They just live their own life inside the park. So I'll go through that. Reserves-wise, Ecuador has 4.8 billion barrels of reserves estimated. Those are 3P and 3C reserves for those who are in the oil industry. And the major contributor to that is, again, ITT. As I said before, that is, we've so far only drilled in the Tiputini field, and the reserves have gone up from 900 million barrels already to 1.7 billion barrels, and just by drilling in one field. We should start drilling in Tambococha by the end of November, beginning of December of this year. The tender has already been awarded, and we expect, once we're set and done for ITT, the reserves just for that field to go up to about 4 billion barrels. We should have a new certification by Ryder Scott at the end of this year, and that's going to give us additional numbers, but once we start drilling in Tambococha and Ispingo, those reserves should go up. Let me talk a little bit about ITT, which is important that I mention, and I like to talk about this because I don't know if you're aware, but we have a referendum in Ecuador coming up with 7 questions, among which one of them is related to the punishment of corruption in the country and make much stronger laws against corruption. That is being discussed in that referendum for people to vote on laws that are much stronger. We'll be touching about re-election and avoiding to have only one re-election instead of presidents to continue to live there and be president forever. That is something we want the people to speak about and vote, stating that we agree on one re-election, just like the ones you have here in the U.S., and not a president to stay forever, because we don't think that's the right thing to do either. Among the 7 questions we have, one of them is related to the ITT, where the environmentalists caring about the biodiversity and the Yasuni Park would like oil to be left underground and not produced. The question is, can the country afford that? Just for this project, the expectations are for $46 billion to come out of that field through production. So we need to either produce that, or somebody else needs to tell us where that money is going to come from. We went out in the past government to the community and asked for countries to contribute if they were interested in world preservation and all these things, to contribute for us to leave the oil underground. But there were no real takers on that proposal. So we've tried that already. And so the government made the decision, okay, we were going to develop this field, but we're going to do it in a sustainable and a responsible way. So the rules to develop that field are very strict. The park is about 1 million hectares in area. The intangible zone, where you cannot do anything at all, I mean, you cannot put a nail on the ground, that's strict, are 780,000 hectares. Congress approved for a development plan that we could use only 1,000 hectares out of the 1 million hectares. That's 0.1% of the area. That was approved by Congress. We are now saying we will only use less than 300 hectares to develop that field. So that is a third, which was authorized by Congress. We have to reduce our footprint. The roads are a maximum of 6 meters wide, and they have to be built in an environmentally friendly manner. We have to leave underground passes for the animals to move around the park underneath those roads. We have to, when we cut for the road, the trees need to meet at the top tree. They cannot be separated. They need to touch each other. So it's like a tunnel within the jungle. Because of the animals, you know, the monkeys, for example, they need to be able to jump across and continue to move. So there are all sorts of rules to do that in a responsible manner. No contamination, no spills, and all those things that need to be very, very careful. So we are doing that in a very responsible manner. We're taking the press in the next few days just to show them how we're doing, to try and reduce the pressure from the environmentalists, and let them know that we are doing things in a responsible way. We do care for the environment, and we want to do away from the perception that the oil industry is a dirty business, that we contaminate everything, that we don't take care of the environment and things like that. Accidents do happen, you know, I mean, and that's something we cannot control, but the purpose is to avoid all sorts of accidents if at all possible. Petroamazonas is, as I stated before, is the main operator in the country. One thing to take from this slide is we've been able to reduce the production costs, which a few years back were around $33 a barrel. We're now down to $17 a barrel and coming down. Our target is $15 per barrel operational cost, production costs, I'm sorry, and $6.65 for operational costs. The next $2 that we need to cut will be through changing the energy matrix. Instead of generating through diesel power, we are taking the national electric grid all the way to Cuyabeno and to ITT through transmission lines and using the hydraulic power that the country has enough. That way we will not have CO2 in the park, and we will not have noise pollution that affects birds, animals, and whatever you have in the park. So we're going to have clean generation going to the park, and that's going to be a large project of working on that transmission line, which is already out for tender at this point in time. The oil industry, as I said, we started in 1925 in Ancon, Santa Elena, and then in the 1970s we started the development on the jungle, the Amazon basin. So there's where most of the oil comes from today. The hydrocarbon law was established, the new hydrocarbon law was established in 2010, and some changes were made to it. Today in the law you have basically three types of contracts. A services contract where a company is paid a tariff per barrel produced. The company is responsible for the OPEX and the CAPEX in that project. And through a services contract, the company operates a given block or field. Then we have a specific services contract, which is different. That normally is a contract that goes to service companies to run the field, but the operator continues to be Petroamazonas. So the service company is not an operator in that case. They also get paid per barrel produced, but per incremental barrel produced. So if I'm producing today 20,000 barrels in the field, I increase to 25,000 barrels with the work I do, I get paid for those 5,000 barrels additional, a given X dollars per barrel produced. The company is responsible for the CAPEX that goes into those projects. So, and then what we're trying to introduce now, which is already contemplated in the law, are the the production sharing contracts, which are participation contracts in accordance to the Ecuadorian law. Those are different, and we'll see a little bit about that once we look at the projects. We already saw this, but I'll skip. These are the production sharing contracts. Basically, when you tender, you tell the government, out of the total production, government will take, in this example that I'm showing here, 25% goes to the government, 75% goes to the company. But the company is responsible for CapEx, OpEx, and of course paying taxes. At the end of the day, the bottom line is that with the taxes, the different taxes the companies pay, with all the expenses and all that, at the end of the day, the companies end up with a participation of around 25%, and the government ends up with about 75% because of all the government takes that go on in this matrix. So that more or less is what happens when you go into these contracts. The difference here is that in these contracts, you are able to be paid in kind, meaning that the companies can take their oil and do whatever they want with it. In the specific services contracts, you cannot be paid in kind. The tariff is paid in dollars, in money. So that's a big difference. Also, in the production sharing contracts, you are able to book reserves, meaning that you can get a bank loan or something like that to finance your projects because you do have the booking of reserves, and that helps get financing for the projects. A little bit about taxes, and these are specific to the oil industry. Ecuador has law number 10, which is $1 of the produced oil goes to the geographical sector or the local, let's call it state in the U.S., in Ecuador will be the province, that where the oil comes from, then the Amazon jungle. Those different cities and towns in the area get $1 per barrel produced. Also, Law 40 takes 50% of the transported oil in the pipelines that goes to the national budget. So those are taxes that the company have to pay. An important one is also labor participation, which is actually a profit-sharing type of tax, where any company, and not just the oil sector, has to pay its employee has to share with its employee 15% of profit sharing for the company goes to the employees. Profit sharing, and those are earnings after tax, are 15% goes to employees. Now, there's a bit of change here. For the operators, that 15% is distributed 3% to the employees and 12% to the local community for projects in the local community. If you're a service company, all of that 15% actually goes to the employees and its families. So it's kind of committing the employees to work for the company properly. You know, you have skin in the game. If you don't produce correctly, if you don't do things right, the company loses money. There's no profit sharing. So it kind of aligns the people. But that is a cost for the company, so they need to consider that if they go and invest in Ecuador. As I said, that is a sort of tax that applies for all services. If you sell shoes, you know, you're going to have to pay 15% to your employees as a profit-sharing tax. Income tax is just straight 22% of your earnings. I'm sorry, of your yeah, and that is something that the companies have to pay in this sector. And then there's some extraordinary taxes that are related to windfalls, where related to the price of oil. If we are negotiating a contract and the current price of oil is $50 a barrel, and that price of oil goes to $100 a barrel, which happened in the past, that difference between the price where you agreed upon and the current oil price, that is divided, those earnings are divided 70% to the government, 30% to the company. So that is something that needs to be considered once you're investing in Ecuador, and it's basically has nothing to do with the country, but more related to what the market is saying with regards to the price of oil, international price of oil, WTI normally, which is the one we use as a reference. A little bit about how the laws are structured in Ecuador. You have the Constitution, just like you do in the U.S., which is the main law. And then underneath those laws are secondary laws like the organic law that works on the tax regime, for example. Then the next level down is the hydrocarbon law. Then you have other operational regulations. And next level down, there are executive orders that may change certain things. But executive orders cannot go against a law that's already stated in the Constitution, so it's just an order of priority of how laws are structured in Ecuador. Transportation systems, we do have two pipelines. One, Azote, which is for medium crude oil. This was built many years back, has 45 years, or was built during Texaco's years. And then we have the OCP, which is for heavy crude oil, and that was built by a private sector. We do have excess capacity in the country. We can transport around 800,000 barrels of oil a day, and our current production is 530,000 barrels a day. My personal target is by the end of this government, in the next 4 years, our production should be around 700,000 barrels a day. That is where we're working towards and doing all what we need to do to increase the production for the country and support the local economy through oil exports. A little bit about the projects, and the Intracampos is a project that's coming up. All the blocks in mustard type color are the ones that are coming up. That tender should be out January of 2018. We're getting ready for that. One of the things that's holding us back is the reserve certification by Ryder Scott. We need to have that so we can present the companies with actual certified numbers by a private company for them to be able to invest. About the blocks that are there are 8 blocks with several fields, and you have what the original oil in place is for those fields, and also the reserves. And those reserve numbers are the ones that are going to be confirmed by Ryder Scott, which is based here in Houston, to be able to give some certification to the companies that are interested in tendering. And towards the right, you have the estimated investment required for each of these fields, which is a total of $1.2 billion, more or less, that these fields will require as investment for the projects. So this is open for the private sector, be that local or international, and we're asking companies to consider this and come into the country and propose alternatives. Mr. Francisco Rendon, who's here, who's the Secretary of Hydrocarbons, his department will be the one responsible for tendering this out and negotiating with the companies through this whole process. I'm going to skip this one. Just as I stated before, January the tenders will be out, and we hope to have this awarded by March of 2018 to the successful bidders. A different round coming up will be the blocks in the south, close to the Peruvian border. All these blocks in red squares, you have the Peruvian border here, and we know that on the other side of the border, Peru has been successful in working on those projects. That there are companies who are already operating there and producing there. So we expect the companies to be successful on the other side of the border. As you well know, a geographical border doesn't mean anything for the reservoirs. They still cut across and with no problem. So that will be coming out soon. Those will be exploration blocks, and let me just show you a little bit here. Those all are exploration blocks. and we don't have infrastructure there, so they'll need roads, pipelines, surface facilities, in addition to the exploration work required to drill wells and so on. One of the things that we are pretty sure that these blocks are going to be successful because Peru drilled in Lote 64 and they are producing 30 API oil across the border. There is a Situche field there which has been very good for Peru, so the expectations are for the same type of formations be on the other side, and we expect companies can be successful there. So that is something we are opening up, and that tender should be out by the end of Q2 next year. Again, we're working on all the documentation and the right approvals to have that ready. Those are more for medium or large-sized companies, because of being an exploration type of activity and their new fields. Also, we are working with Peru on trying to use the pipeline that they have in the north of Peru, and we're trying to reach an agreement to be able to use their pipeline, which is much closer than building another pipeline to meet up with our current facilities in the north of Ecuador. So that alternative is also being looked at in order to be able to ship that oil out. For those who are interested in downstream, we continue to work in the project for the Pacific Refinery, a project that was promoted by the prior government, but they didn't have any takers because of the way that was being proposed. To start with, the numbers were too large. You know, they had a budget of $15 billion for that project. We've been able already to bring it down to $8.2 billion under the same specifications. We have firm proposals now, and we will certainly look at additional alternatives that are proposed. We will not be financing that project as a government. We would like a private sector to invest there. What we're committing is to sell the oil. One of the alternatives is for us to sell the oil to the company investing there at international price, and we will commit to buy the clean products also at international price and let the company make the investment there. The second alternative is for us to provide the oil and get the clean products back and do a sort of BOT project where the company will charge the country a certain tariff, processing tariff for the crude oil. So those two options are open for that project. We're looking still for a 300,000 barrel project that will receive, it will be high conversion refinery that will be able to receive, and this is a little bit different from what was planned before for some of you that were involved. We're looking for something that will take 13 to 18 API oil, because instead of bringing the oil as originally was planned to bring it from Venezuela, we will use ITT local oil to feed the refinery. The refinery should have a 500 megawatt power generation, even though the national grid will be connected. For those who are familiar with the refining industry, we cannot afford to be without power, so we need that backup power to be in place for the refinery not to stop for a given power shortage. And we are also trying to improve the quality of our products, fuels in Ecuador, so we're asking this to be a Euro 5 type refinery to produce that quality of clean products there.
Would you just highlight on the map which refinery you're talking about?
I'm sorry. This is the place where we have the Esmeralda refinery, which it went through a refurbishing process not long ago, but it's still not up to speed. This one produces processes 110,000 barrels a day, and this is a very old refinery. It's got over, I don't know, before I was born, I guess it was there. So very small. So this is the one we're trying to build, that is part of the commitment the country has towards that. We would like, because of a dollarized economy, this refinery attacks a couple of issues. One of them, we stop importing fuels, which we do today. Secondly, it creates jobs. Thirdly, it improves the quality of our fuels. And all of that, for example, when we import fuels, dollars go out. And we're trying to keep those dollars in the country because of the dollarized economy. So it attacks several issues, and people might question, well, a refinery is not a very profitable business. Why are you building a refinery? Maybe there's a nexus refineries around the world. Well, we have other issues that we need to resolve, and political, social issues that can be resolved through this, and economical reasons for the country. So for us, we don't see it really as a profitable business for the country, but more of covering other types of issues that are there. Here we go. Monteverde, that's another project that we would like to monetize. It's a gas terminal in the Pacific. It's been built. We invested $600 million in there, and we either would like to sell this project or preferably look for a partner, or we'll invest another $300 million and convert that into a international hub where, because of our geographical location, it would be good to manage and distribute fuels, not just gas. In this case, it's just gas. So part of the additional investment is to convert this into a hub that will be able to distribute fuels such as other types of gas or clean products. The project has, because of its geographical location, we're here. So we can cover the South Pacific very easily, and if you go across, you can cover China easily. And when you have issues such as the one you went through recently in the Gulf of Mexico, we could support from there any fuel needs once you have storms and things like that through the Panama Canal. So geographically, we think we're very well positioned, and that is something we're trying to promote to the companies that deal with this type of business, to come in and take over the operation, make additional investments, and convert that into a international hub for fuel distribution. This is about what I have. I'm trying to go through this very quickly to leave some time for question and answers, so I'll be glad to entertain. Before I finish, I would like to leave this book for you as for your library, so you can keep it. It's a hydrocarbon annual report.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
So I hope your students and yourselves enjoy it.
We'll move over here and be a little bit more comfortable. I want to thank the minister for a very good talk, and I have a couple questions that I'll ask just to start this off. In the bid rounds, the tenders that you talked about, how do you win? How does a company come in? Do they bid a commitment for number of wells, or do they bid a commitment for a different tax structure than what you're proposing? Or?
It depends on the contract.
And I'm sorry, but because the event is being live streamed, I think maybe the use of the mics, if you don't mind.
Hello?
Yeah, here. Yeah, it depends on the type of contract we use, but for these contracts, which are participation contracts, basically the company commits a certain participation to the government. out of the production say, okay, we propose to give the government 25% of the production, we will keep 75%. Other company might come in and say, I give the government 40% and I'll keep 60%. So that's evaluated. The other thing that's evaluated is the total investment the company commits to the project. And there's annual plans that they need to propose. So those two things are evaluated in these type of contracts. With the specific services contracts, other things that are evaluated, for example, are investment and an activity plan. I will drill X number of wells, I'll do X number of workovers. The wells drilled will be 2 horizontals, 2 vertical, 2 highly deviated, and so on. So it depends on the contract modality, but basically the profit sharing contracts are going back to that, are how much is the government take versus how much is the company take, and also how much investment you're planning to do in the project.
So you laid out kind of what the percentage overall will be going to the government versus the oil company. So they can bid something different than that, or a higher percentage to the government, or that's what I'm a little confused on.
At the end of the day, by law there is a minimum government take when you add the actual oil participation plus all the taxes that are paid. By law, you have about 75% has to stay in the country. So the companies need to work within those limits, but they have the options to bid. Taxes are not negotiable. The tax laws are there, and you have to pay taxes no matter what you do. It's just like here in the U.S. You know, the IRS tells you how much money you have to pay, and you either do that or go to jail, right? But there are other things you can play with, and as I said before, you can certainly, we're open to discuss in your tender what the participation you're proposing and the investment you're proposing.
One other question. In those tenders, you mentioned in certain parts of the country you need to build roads, you're going to need to maybe have pipeline. How is that obligation split between the company and the governments? I mean, is that something the companies bid on? Is, here's the full development plan, including roads, distribution lines, maybe a pipeline, or are they just bidding purely on the development of the resources and expect the government to build the pipelines or the roads or
the main pipelines are already built, so there's no need for commitment in that area. But once you're awarded a block, any work that you do inside the block, and they'll give you the coordinates for that block, anything that's required to be done in that block for you to develop the project is the company's responsibility. And that is part of the investment. You say, I'll invest, I don't know, $200 million, and during your discussion for the annual plan, you say, okay, I'm going to have to build 2 kilometers of roads, I'm going to have to build secondary pipelines, I have to build a facility, and I have to drill 2 wells, and I have to do 5 workovers, and so on.
Oh, thank you. That's helpful. And then one other question, which it leads back to, I think Ecuador has set up things that make sure that money goes back to areas that are being developed, also goes broader to all the population. What is the citizenship support for these changes, and also the communities where you're going to be building? Are they open to having foreign companies come in?
Yes, I mean the least of our problems nowadays are the local communities, because they see that as jobs and improvement of the living conditions. Companies do a lot of with the school system, a lot of with medical facilities, roads, and of course the communities would like, I mean, I get requests every day, I need this road to be paved instead of just being a gravel road. And we work on those things as part of the community program. So in general, the communities are not a problem, and that's well defined. Our main issue today are basically environmental groups which are very strong especially being in the Amazon jungle, is something that calls everybody's attention, and they're making sure that things are done right.
Thank you. I'll open it up for questions. Yes.
In regard to the tax bracket, it seems to be high. So what kind of tax incentives does the government offer?
There are laws there where you have incentives for alliances between the private and the public sector. There are certain years, the first 5 years, you don't pay taxes, for example, in certain conditions. So you need to really understand the tax law and get the right advice when you go in to take advantage of those things. But there are certain, as I say before, where you have a tax break for your first 5 years or until your investments are amortized and things like that. What I presented here, of course, the general tax laws for companies to understand that, but there are incentives in the law that will allow you to reduce those taxes.
Yes, George.
How many nationalities work for Petroamazonas as employees?
Petroamazonas is 100% national staff. We do have contractors or service companies that come in and provide services that have international staff, but the actual employees for Petroamazonas are all national employees.
Yes, back in the red sweater.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Given the competition worldwide for attracting investment, I was wondering two questions that got my understanding of these bidding. For the smaller blocks, it's going to be project finance, and so the investors have to be paid after it's authorized by the finance ministry, which seems like a sort of roundabout way to receive payments and could implicate risk. And also, it's our understanding that some of the return on investment is limited to 15%, which might not be enough to cover some of the risks. I was just wondering how you have balanced that.
Yes, remember that those are participation contracts or production sharing contracts, so they don't have to wait for the Ministry of Finance to be paid, because they get the oil they produce goes straight to them, and then they can negotiate the oil as they see fit. They can export it or sell it to the local refinery or whatever. So that takes care of that part. Now we are conscious that we need to compete with countries that are being very aggressive. Colombia just changed the hydrocarbon law to make it more attractive because they need reserves. Brazil is being very attractive lately, Peru also. So we know we have to compete with neighboring countries. So we're in a process right now of understanding what the other countries are doing so that we can propose to the president certain changes to the law. With regards to the internal rate of return, even though the specific services contracts limits the internal rate of return to 15%, the exploration contracts have a 25% internal rate of return, which is the case for the two projects that I presented here. But truthfully, the internal rate of return, the actual internal rate of return for the companies are higher than those negotiated numbers. The reason being basically that you negotiate a tariff with a given number of reserves. And what has happened in the recent past is that those reserves that are certified by Ryder Scott, for example, are very conservative. And companies end up with much larger reserves in their fields, which makes the project much more profitable in the past. So it gets to where companies really need to do their homework to understand geologically and reservoir-wise what the reserves are, for them to have their own internal number of internal rate of return instead of just what the number that's negotiated with the government. And also service companies benefit from these projects with higher internal rate of return because they provide their own services with in-house portfolio of services. So they get a benefit from the oil production, and then they get the benefit from providing services at market rates. So it compounds when you're a service company. So many of these contracts have become more attractive for service companies than for operators, and that is why we're switching over to production sharing contracts to make it attractive for operators also.
So I'm going to follow up with on my earlier question, because it just came to mind. The extraordinary income tax, it's compared to a base price, is that a negotiated base price, or is it a fixed base price from the government, or how do you determine what that base price is?
It's a negotiated base price, and what we're doing today is we've learned our lesson in the sense that you cannot have a fixed price. So all of those contracts are being indexed now to the WTI. So in the case of a tariff, not in the case of the production sharing contract, but in the contracts that have tariffs, those tariffs are adjusted automatically as the WTI changes. So you have a curve, which is actually a straight line, and I hope the mathematicians here will tell me that a straight line and a curve are the same thing, right? But there's a line there where you, for a WTI price, corresponds to a tariff for the contract. And then for the production sharing contracts, you negotiate a tariff, and that is used as a reference only to calculate the windfall taxes.
Yes, right here in the middle.
So when you're looking at the rounds that are coming out, for example, Mexico is weighting 90% of the bid in terms of how much companies are willing to contribute to the state, how much additional production or additional sharing. But when you look at Colombia, for example, and the recent changes that they do to the legislation, the round now weighs 90% to the work commitments that the companies are trying to do. So you have different incentives there, and you have different schools of thought in that case. So where is Ecuador leaning? Towards more production to the government, or towards don't give me as much production, just do the work that we need to get the reserves up?
No, in the case of the production sharing contracts, we're looking at more production for the government. So the split between government participation and company participation, we're putting more of a focus in that area, more than the actual investment in activity. Because we think one is a consequence of the other one.
This man right here.
Pertain Marex, BNP Paribas. Two questions. The data that you mentioned on the east side of the Oriente, were they acquired by the government, and do we need to buy these data or buy them from a geophysical company to pursue our studies? That's the first question.
The data will be available for you, whatever we have. There will be a data room, and you can take the data and analyze it. If you feel you require more information and that's commercially available, it's up to the company to buy it.
Okay, because usually governments charge a price to access data. Second question, are you going to go to bid rounds?
Yes. For the intracampus will be out in January, and hopefully by the end of the second semester, the other rounds for the southern blocks will be out for bidding.
Thank you very much.
The fellow right next to him. Yeah.
First of all, thank you for such an excellent presentation, Enrique. It was very impressive. My question has to do with exploration. I'm so glad that you guys are focusing on exploration, and for that, what you're doing is right, changing terms from service into PSA. There's no question how anybody would invest without that. But there's an issue that is still would be considered a roadblock for investors, and that's arbitration. Ecuador pulled out of the CIADI in the previous administration. And let me tell you, you're not just talking to the colleagues here in Houston, it would be very difficult for someone to invest large amount of money, without a good arbitration behind it.
Yeah, that question has come up in several times, and it is an issue. I was talking to our consul here yesterday, and many of those contracts have not, those agreements have not been fulfilled, in a sense that they have not finished our request to leave those agreements. But what I said yesterday towards one of these questions is, we are willing to sit down and discuss bilateral agreements with governments where companies would like to invest. If it's the U.S., companies, hopefully so, we will sit down with the U.S. government and try and work on a bilateral agreement. The past concepts have been that, arbitration has not been fair to the government of Ecuador, and that is why we're looking at alternatives. We can use, for example, the Chilean courts, which is something that's acceptable for the companies. They feel they're more less biased than local courts. So that is an alternative we certainly can consider, and be up to the government. Those decisions were made towards the end of last government, which, a lot of people questioned why, but we need to correct that, Raul.
Any more questions? Yes, from the blue shirt. Yes. Blue shirt. Yes. You.
Me. Yeah, this white shirt.
The one with the glasses and the blue shirt and the orange tie, grayer hair, mustache. Okay. I got you.
Gracias, señor ministro. Question. Who owns the mineral rights? The state of Ecuador?
Yes, in Ecuador, by law, mineral rights are owned by the state of Ecuador.
Who owns the surface rights?
The government of Ecuador.
Property, there's no right-of-way requisitions?
No.
From 1961 to 2014, the GDP was always growing in Ecuador. Of course, from 2014 up to today, it was declining. Not only Ecuador, countries like Nigeria or Venezuela or producing oil. My question is, with all this implementation, are we going to move the present forecast of GDP growth, which is around 1 to 1.2 to 3%, and move Ecuador back to the group of developing countries? This because this is overall the bottom line expectation, to put Ecuador back to the developing countries, on which the GDP growth is about 3%. This is the expectation.
Those are the plans. I mean, the recent numbers that we saw, the tendency has already changed in Ecuador, and we've seen growth in the last quarter. So we expect those numbers to change. Now, will we reach the numbers that you mentioned? I'm not too sure. We're still too soon to say, but part of all these changes are to change the tendency and to have a better country economics through all these processes.
Yes.
Question for you. So it was a great presentation, of course. You talked about taking power lines to the remote areas to get clean generation for the companies to work with. I'm sure that's not a cheap proposition. Probably take a lot of capital and time. Have you thought about incorporating battery technologies that are coming to get big batteries, like a huge containers of batteries, using that as power?
No, we have not, even though we're slowly working in solar energy in Ecuador. The jungle is not the best place to have solar energy because of it's a very wet area, very cloudy area being in the jungle. So that is not an alternative we have considered. Yeah, the power lines is an expensive project, but when you run the economics, it's much cheaper to run those lines there than instead of generating with diesel, oil, or combustion engines. And in certain cases, we can use also gas that's being flared, and by the end of 2018, the commitment for the oil industry is to be zero diesel and zero flaring in the area. So that is why we're going to this type. So it is expensive, and also the technology for power lines and towers that we'll be using, we're considering to building towers similar to a project in Brazil in the jungle where the towers go above tree tops in order to avoid cutting trees down and affecting. So there'll be very high towers in the area, and that is a technology we're considering using at this time.
Question also, sorry.
Yeah.
Last week, Big Institute held a really good program there on oil and gas and future renewables and everything else. Where does Ecuador fit into the question of renewables, number one? Number two, how would Ecuador attract investment into Ecuador to develop fields where versus somebody saying, all right, should I go down to Ecuador or should I invest more in the Permian Basin? Where, through tracking where the costs are much less, perhaps.
So for those who couldn't hear, the question one was, where is Ecuador going on renewables? And the second one is, how do you compete with other countries, for example, the Permian Basin, where it's fairly cheap to get in. Right now, people are making a lot of money.
Yeah, I mean, with regards to your second question, we have to compete with the market. It's just like any other business. So it's not easy, but there are certain companies that like to invest in the area. We don't have the majors at this point in time. We have a couple of large companies such as Eni and Repsol in Ecuador, but the majors, Exxons of this world, are not there. And we're trying to entice them to go there. So we're going to have to work on making that attractive to them. And it's, again, competing for resources. With regards to the renewables, Ecuador is way ahead in that, in the sense that most of our power generation is already in hydroelectric power. So we are there. We built several very large projects. So I would say at least 80% of our power generation in Ecuador is done through hydraulic power. We are working in certain areas of the country with solar and wind power, but mainly it's hydraulic power because of the geographical conditions and lots of rivers, lots of water in the area.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
Yes. Carlos, good presentation. This is Fabian Vera, I'm an engineer. In your presentation, you show the cost per barrel $6.56 for Petroamazonas as a company. But Petroamazonas has several fields. Can you explain a little more how that price was achieved?
As you well know, we have operational costs and production costs. Our operational costs are around $6 and a bit. Our production costs are around $16, $17. The main, we've done things such as power generation, for example, which cuts down from 24 cents kilowatt hour to 4 cents kilowatt hour, for example. We've implemented instead of having additional surface facilities, we're using the ESP pumps, which are already downhole, to pump the oil to the stations. So instead of having additional infrastructure, we've reduced our drilling costs. You know, a well in ITT a couple of years back used to cost over $5 million. Today, those wells are around $3 million per well. So we've really improved our operational drilling costs in there. So things like that, I mean, it's what we're doing. We've reduced personnel in Petroamazonas, and today we could reduce an additional 1,400 people in Petroamazonas, but that is a decision that has to be made, a political decision that needs to be made by the president of Ecuador, because some people will end up without a job. And it's not the same thing doing it for a private company. Governments have to look after jobs, and that is always an issue. So there are several things like that have been done. We've worked more in improving workovers and improving production through that type of activity instead of drilling new wells. So improved recovery factors, and one of the technologies we're looking for today is to use IOR and EOR in the country as a next step, because some of our reservoirs are old and they need to be pressurized or use that type of technologies to improve our recovery factor, which is still at lower levels.
We'll take one more question.
Any information that you can provide on organized crime?
No. Ecuador is
organized like it is here.
Ecuador is more of a petty crime country. There's not really organized crime over there. We do have issues with drug traffic. Ecuador has become an exit port, and I'm sad to say when our buddies from Manta left from the U.S. government, those types of cartels have grown in the country. We have Mexico drug cartels, Colombia drug cartels that bring the drugs from neighboring countries and use Ecuador as an exiting country to other markets. And that is something the government is really fighting and doing a lot of effort trying to control. On a weekly basis, you see drug being captured and stuff. So that is the type of issues we have. Then the organized crime, I don't think is an issue in Ecuador. No. Kidnapping, not really. I mean, that has gone down significantly, and past years there was much more, and it's just I don't think that's an issue in the country anymore.
So I'm going to finish. I think you laid out a very open plan to get investment in, but I'm sure you've run into this in your questions with companies in Houston, is the longer-term stability of those terms, those contracts. So if you could just talk about how you see the legal changes being able to be sustained for long periods of time.
To me, it's a political decision, and the government has made a very strong effort. Mr. Moreno has made a very strong effort to respect contracts. Even though they were not signed by this government, they were signed by prior governments. It's the country's law, and we have to respect it. So we've gone back, and one of the things I made comments yesterday, when we came on board, Petroamazonas owed to contractors $3.6 billion. Today, that debt is down to $500 million. So we are complying. We're working with the companies. We're not imposing. we're trying to reach agreements. Okay, I don't have the money to pay in cash. Would you take bonds and that type of arrangements? And the companies are willing to sit down and discuss. If we do it in an openly manner, if we do it in a straightforward manner, we're not just putting the gun to your head and either you take it or you go. That's not the attitude this government has. I can guarantee that this government will continue to work that way until the end. And one of the things we are working on is to have that stability that is what the companies like. You know, if you have a contract, you go by that contract until the end, and so whatever the results are. There's way outs of contracts. If a contract is no good for either party, the people can walk away from contracts. But there's a commitment of the country to respect, and that is why companies are still there. You know, and I had a meeting last night with Halliburton during dinner, and we discussed money and how we're going to pay old accounts, and all those things are being fixed, and we'll respect the contracts.
Well, I want to thank you for coming, Minister Perez. I thought it was a very good overview of the changes, and I think that's very helpful for all of us to understand much better now than we did when we came into the room. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.